Thank you for joining us today for the Senate Education Committee meeting. I've been a request of personal privilege. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to introduce my intern, Atlee Pancaskey, at the back of the room here. You can stand up and say hi, please. Atlee's mother and I were college roommates, so he doesn't live in my district, but just so thankful to have him here and have his assistance today.
Thank you, and thank you for being with us today, Atlee. Yes, Senator O'Shea, point of personal privilege.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to introduce my intern, Jamie Shivels, here from, she's a University of Kansas law student who will graduate in May. And so hit her up for work and jobs and all that good stuff.
Let's pass the bar exam. How about that? Okay, thank you very much for being with us today. Okay, committee, we have work before us. First up on the agenda is final action on the confirmation hearings. I did want to make sure that everyone knew that so there was a letter that was referenced and partially read yesterday by the conferee from his attorney. That was not submitted to me as committee chair. It was sent to Senate President Masterson and Minority Leader Sykes. If we had gotten it yesterday morning, it would have been sent to you yesterday. But when the committee meeting ended yesterday, it was uploaded by, it has been uploaded by our committee assistant. So thank you very much for that, Cynthia. Everyone's got a copy. So at this point, we are going to address the motion for those nominees. And at this time, our choices are one of three: to pass out an individual favorably from our committee, to pass out of our committee an individual without recommendation, or to pass out an individual out of committee unfavorably. And just to be clear, for those that are attending, those that are watching, as well as committee members, regardless of how we pass each individual out of committee, they will each be brought up for vote by the Senate body of a whole. So every senator will have that opportunity to vote. So at this time, is there a motion with regard to nominee Mr. Carl Ice? Senator Gossage.
Madam Chair, I vote that we move Mr. Ice out favorably from the committee.
Okay, do I have a second? I have a second from Senator O'Shea. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nay. Mr. Ice passes out of committee favorably unanimously. Next up, we have nominee Cynthia Lane. Yes, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we pass out of committee Cynthia Lane without recommendation.
Okay, do I have a second on that? I have a second from Senator Gossage. Is there any discussion, committee? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Nay. Okay, would you like your votes recorded? Okay, let's have a count. So by a show of hands, those in favor of passing out nominee Cynthia Lane out of committee without recommendation, please raise your hand. Okay, so we have 4. Those that are opposed, we have 4. I will be the tiebreaker, and I will be an aye vote. So we have a vote of 5-4. So those that were opposed, did you want to be recognized? Okay, Senator Petty has requested that, and Senator Sykes as well. So now we are with confirmation for Mr. Winter. Do I have a motion on that? Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a motion to pass out Winter Jr. As a member of the Kansas Board of Regents without recommendation.
Okay. Do I have a second for that? I have a second from Senator Erickson. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, it appears that the ayes pass. So we are now done with our final action with regard to those three nominees.
Chair, I'd like to have my no recorded.
Absolutely. Senator Senator Petty recorded, as well as Senator Sykes as nay votes. So we are now going to close that action on those three that were here for our confirmation hearings. I appreciate those that were here for the hearings, as well as the participation of the committee. At this point in time, we'll let the room clear, let the door close, it will get quiet, and then we'll begin with our hearing. So committee, we are going to begin our hearing now on Senate Bill 362, and we will start with the reviser who will give us background information, an overview of the bill. Thank you so much for being with us, Reviser Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Senate Bill 362 would amend the requirements of local school boards regarding the publication, documentation, and consideration of building needs assessments and state assessments. So for the needs assessments, currently, local school boards are required to conduct a needs assessment of the educational needs of each attendance center in the district. Senate Bill 362 would require school districts to publish those assessments on their website. Additionally, the local board would be required to include in its minutes that the needs assessment was provided to the board evaluated the needs assessment, and how the board used the needs assessment in preparation of the school district's budget. With regard to the state assessments, the bill would require local boards of education to review those state assessment results and document three things. The first is the barriers that must be overcome to have students achieve grade level proficiency on state assessments. The second is any budget actions that should be taken to address and remove those barriers. And third, the amount of time the board estimates it will take for each student to achieve grade level proficiency if those actions are implemented. And the bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, we'll start with Senator Petty with questions for our reviser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tamara, on the first page on line 28 and 29, when it says the amount of time the board estimates it will take for each student, so that is each student within a particular school district.
Yeah, it does say each student, you are correct.
And then my second question, Madam Chair, is on the second page, line 1 and 2, and 3 and 4, I guess, when it says about the needs assessments and state assessments, and it says copies of such budget summaries, needs assessment, and state assessment documentation shall be available on request. Isn't that already under the Freedom of Information Act? Isn't that already law?
So you're correct that there are a number of statutes that do require publication or allow the public to access some of this information. So the changes here are just to be consistent with the changes that are on the first page, so that all of those documents are just repeated to be required to be available.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Tamara. On the memo, is it a typo where you're referring to 346?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to I was like, I think that's farm milk. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, Senator Dietrich.
Thank you. I'm kind of piggybacking on what Senator Petty asked you. It says each student several times. Isn't that a privacy violation?
So I'm happy to help clarify if you have a suggestion for language. I don't think it means each student as in each individual student. I think it means all students. But again, I'm happy to work with you on some language if you want to clear that up.
I think that's a little worrisome.
Any other questions with the revisor? Okay, thank you very much for your help with that. Let's now begin with our proponent testimony. So first up, I have Mike O'Neill, Kansas Policy Institute, and Mike is with us today virtually.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes. Now we can see you.
This is my maiden voyage on WebEx. I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. That's the bad news. The good news is I'm on day 5 of quarantine, no symptoms, no temperature. So I think I'm close to being done with this. So it was a pretty easy journey through this COVID experience. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear on 362. Some of this will sound familiar to the committee, and that's because we did address this statute last year when we came in and wanted to provide a little bit more benefit to the students from the requirement that the local boards pass budgets. We want to make sure that those budgets are going to be reasonably calculated to get kids to an appropriate level of proficiency. What we didn't know at the time, or at least I didn't know at the time, because the requirement for a building-based needs assessment has been on the books for nearly 2 decades. The assumption was that all the schools were following this law and pretty much following what the State Department of Education had put out in terms of the needs assessment. What we learned over the interim after this last year's bill passed is that sadly, not many schools are complying with the law, and those that at least are aware of the law are not doing actual building-based needs assessments. The one thing I might clarify from the explanation that Tamara gave you, I think a couple of times she referred to state assessments. There are actually 2 types of assessments, as you'll see on page 2. There's the building-based needs assessment, which is addressed in the statute, but then also state assessments. What we're talking about in terms of this bill are the building-based needs assessments that are talked about in section 1. So hopefully that clears up a question with that. And Dave Trabert with Kansas Policy Institute, and by the way, I represent Kansas Policy Institute. What he will explain a little bit more in detail is the project that he conducted in the summer to basically survey 25 school districts to see what their level of compliance with the needs assessment requirement was and how they were doing it, what type of information they were collecting. And it was very concerning to us. I have attached to my testimony his 4-page summary of what they found, and he can get more into the granular detail. There were too many records that he has that to be produced to the committee, but that's available to committee members, and he's welcome to dive into some of those details. But there was frankly quite a bit of pushback, and basically we were told in no uncertain terms that, well, since there isn't any requirement that the assessments be available to anybody, there's nothing in writing, and so we're not going to provide you with any information. Some districts, to their credit, did provide a good deal of information, but that information informed us that these are truly not building-based needs assessments as contemplated by the needs assessment document that you'll find attached to my testimony and appears on the Kansas State Department of Education website. So had we known all this before last year, we probably would have included what you see before you in Senate Bill 362 in the bill that we had you pass, or asked you passed, and you did pass last year. So we're back again this year to try to address the concerns that we discovered when we surveyed school districts this past summer. And the recommendations that you see, or the language you see in Senate Bill 362 were actually recommendations we made to the summer interim committee. For any of you that served on that committee, these will look familiar to you. So we actually want some transparency here. We not only want there to be building-based needs assessments, but we want the schools, if you will, to show their work, and the school district to show their work. You'll recall that the Supreme Court in Gannon chided the legislature in school finance when the legislature passed legislation, and the court said, well, the legislature needs to show their work. And I think that's probably appropriate to talk about here, that not only do we have a law in the books that's been around for 20 years on building-based needs assessments, but the schools need to be prepared to show students and families of students how those assessments turned out and how those assessments informed critical decisions being made by the local boards. So that's why we have a requirement in here that the minutes of the meeting in which the board approves its annual budget, it'll include the needs assessment that was provided to the board, and the board evaluated the assessment and how the board used such assessment in the preparation of the school district's budget. And then particularly, these are the things that we find are troubling and need to be addressed. And that is, we need these needs assessments to inform the board of the barriers that must be overcome to have each student achieve grade level proficiency on such assessments. And again, to the question I think Senator Dietrich made, we're not looking at names or identifying any individual students. The schools know who they are, but we want to make sure that every student we're allocating sufficient funds to make sure that every student meets the Rose standards. And critically, if the needs assessment identifies gaps and reasons why some students are being left behind, what actions need to be taken? And we're talking budgetary actions need to be made to allocate sufficient funds to get the job done. And the third one, again, critically, the amount of time the board estimates it will take students to achieve grade level proficiency on the state assessments if the budget actions are implemented. Now, this may be a curious provision to some, but what we're hoping for here is that these budget discussions in local board of educations do not divorce themselves from the actual names and faces of the students who are impacted by these budget decisions every year. These kids who are being left behind aren't going to be at that school board meeting. Maybe some of their parents are. But instead of them just looking at numbers on a sheet of paper, consider the consequences of a child being left behind 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, if allocation of resources is not sufficient to fulfill the promise of getting them an education and getting them up to the Rose standards. We need to put faces to these numbers. So it's not just a budget document where we got placeholder numbers and we're just working numbers around in different categories. We all know that instruction is the key and it's the building block to a successful school budget. Instruction is really where the rubber meets the road. It's what's going to help us meet the goals and expectations of these kids. And I'll leave it there, be happy to answer questions, but we appreciate the opportunity to provide some additional recommendations on this statute that's been around for nearly 2 decades.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. O'Neill. What we will do, committee, is we will go through our 3 proponents, then we'll ask questions, then we'll have our 3 neutral testify and we'll ask them questions. So next up we have Dave Trabert, CEO of Kansas Policy Institute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave Trabert, CEO, Kansas Policy Institute. As Mike said, we conducted an audit of 25 school districts last year to determine what they were doing, if anything, with these building needs assessments. And it was frankly shocking what we found. There were only 2 of those 25 districts that completed the questionnaire that the Department of Education recommends they use. There are some shortcomings in that questionnaire. It doesn't ask, for example, to identify what the barriers are or what needs to be done to remove those barriers. But at least 2 districts, Coffeyville and Kansas City, Kansas, did complete the questionnaire, although there was a lot of inaccurate information on there. They went through the exercise. But for example, in Coffeyville, it said that, keeping in mind, this is to identify what the needs are. Coffeyville said 36 of its 940 students enrolled last year were not proficient. That's 4%. The state assessment says 88% are not proficient. So if you're going to say that you only have 4% not proficient, you clearly aren't looking at what the needs are in those buildings. Kansas City, Kansas took similar action, grossly misrepresenting student achievement in the district. For example, the math comment on F.L. Schlegel High School says 10th grade PLC has created plans to help students understand what is being asked in the math problem. They emphasize scholarly language. And then it also says 10th grade ELA has shown growth. Only 3% of Schlegel's high school kids are proficient in math. How are they going to understand scholarly language if it in fact is in there? Only 6% are on track for college and career in English language arts. Those are the best. Those 2 out of 25 were the best results we found. At the other end of the spectrum, we found 5 districts that defiantly basically said, we don't have to do this. Some of them claimed they did, but Blue Valley, for example, their legal counsel said they do not maintain a document titled Building Needs Assessment Report, nor do I believe maintaining such a report is quite required. How in the world could anyone believe that you could go through a building, look at all the issues, not write anything down, and still use that information? It begs credulity. For them to hide behind, well, the legislature forgot to say write it in a report and keep it, is nonsense, frankly. Gardner Edgerton was another one that did that. They hired outside counsel. They spent money to tell us they're not required to do this. Garden City said, well, they don't require a written assessment, but it was all discussed at specific board meetings. And yet the minutes of those board meetings make no reference to the building needs assessment. Shawnee Mission, Iola, 2 more. Failed to produce anything. The rest of them, the other 18 districts, did provide some documents, but honestly, it felt like the reaction was, uh-oh, we got to send something in. We got a variety of things. We got information about a summer staff retreat. We got something about a budget presentation, or something about how they're allocating at-risk funding, attendance records. None of this addresses the intent, the legislative intent of the building needs assessment. I won't bother going through all 18 of those. It is detailed in my testimony. I'll close with this. We did a scientific survey in December, and 2 of the questions we asked were on building needs assessment. 74% of, these are parents or grandparents of kids in school, 74% said there needs to be more transparency, and 73% said there should be a consequence if these assessments are not done. It's pretty clear from our audit that these assessments are not being done as the legislature intended. And so we would encourage you to adopt this measure and pass it out favorably. And I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Dr. Walt Chappell, President, Educational Management Consultants. You are also with us virtually. Is that correct, Dr. Chappell?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you for being with us today.
I'm glad to be with you. I'm very concerned about the issues that Mike and Dave have brought. This is about accountability and transparency. And I think that all of us can agree that we have a moving target that has been very difficult to identify for a long time. We're spending billions of dollars. I think since 1992, it's over 5 billion now more that's being spent in our public schools. And yet these student achievement scores are actually going down instead of up. And as I look at the reports that are being asked for, it's very difficult for anybody, legislator, a fiscal analyst, anybody that looks at the data, to actually know what it is that they're spending the money on. It's on transportation, it's on maintenance, it's on administration, operations. You go through the list and the reports that I have here in front of me from the State Department of Education, each of these school districts is not reporting on what it costs to teach math or science or career and tech ed. Any of the subjects that we're expecting our kids to learn, we have no idea what they're spending money on in terms of how much those kids are actually receiving in terms of taxpayer dollars or resources. So as Mike points out, this issue has been around for a long time. I started coming to the legislature in 1987. And Mike may remember in 1992 was when the school finance formula was put together, the current one that we have. And I have in front of me right here a document that I prepared in 1992. It's dated 2/20/92. It's entitled A Comprehensive Plan to Provide Quality, Cost-Effective K-12 through Post-Secondary Education in Kansas. So your committee was at one point chaired by Gene Shortdorf and later by Dwayne Umbarger. Some of you may know those people. They tried at that time, with the help of Bill Bunton, to have a similar bill that you're addressing today passed out of committee and go to the Senate floor. Unfortunately, the Kansas Association of School Boards and the Superintendents, the KNEA, and the State Department came in and said, oh, that's too much work. We don't want to do that. It's too costly. It'll be hard for us to do school-based budgeting. Now, unless you tie the costs of a child's education to the building where they're actually going to school, you have no idea what it is that is going to be accomplished with those funds. Now, we have in Wichita and in other cities across this state, millions of dollars of increased budgets. It has gone up tremendously, and particularly with the COVID funding that they're receiving. There is no indication that this is having any impact on the student achievement. Now, as you recall, the Montoy case, I brought you an example of that, sent it to by email. Hopefully you'll read the amicus brief that I produced in 2004. The same in the Gannon case in 2013. Both of those amicus briefs outline very specifically how it is that we can account for the learning needs of kids and then tie the budgets for those school districts to what it costs to educate the kids in the buildings they attend. So this bill that you have in front of us today is a baby step. It takes a small step forward, says, please at least tell us what it is that you have as far as the needs. But for anybody that tries to look at the budgets that the school boards pass in August, there's absolutely no way they can tie that back to the building or to the kids' needs. So I would suggest that you add additional language to this bill as a balloon amendment. I'll be glad to help you with that, and others I'm sure can add language to it. But there's a moving goalpost that the State Department of Education and school districts use to keep us, any of us, from actually finding out how the money is being spent. Let me give you some examples. With No Child Left Behind in 2000 all the way up to 2014, they had what they called proficiency, and they had annual yearly progress. And they were showing that 85 to 90% of the kids, by the years that I was on the State Board of Education in 2008 through 2012, 85 to 90% of the kids were supposedly proficient in math and reading. That was absolutely a false statement, but the only way they got that is they lowered the cut scores. And they included a group of students called meet standards. Now we have new assessments that have been benchmarked to the ACT. That was done by KU. They have a group of researchers there that did that for the State Department of Education after I and others raised all kinds of concerned about the false statements that they were providing to you and the state Supreme Court. They finally changed the test and benchmarked it to the ACT. And now they're changing the definition of the levels of proficiency. It was 3 and 4. Now they included level 2, saying, well, now you're basically ready for college. So moving the goalposts doesn't do any good for any student. Claiming that you can now be waived out of certain subjects and still receive a diploma from a high school and have the principal of the building as well as the superintendent give you those waivers.
Mr. Chappell, Dr. Chappell, I need you to stay focused on the bill at hand. Okay, so we're talking about the requirement for the building needs assessment. Could you get back to that? And I do have 2 other conferees. We need questions for those that are proponents. We have 2 other conferees that are neutral, and we need to have time for questions for them.
I thank you for that, Chair. You and I have dealt with this issue for many years. What I'm trying to say is specifically, you're not going to be able to find any information in the reports that are provided because of the lack of definition in this bill. It's not specific enough as to what the needs are that you're going to identify or what financial data you're going to have to provide. So until these districts are required to do school-based budgeting and to show exactly what it is the students are learning, like Mr. Trabert pointed out, they're providing data that is actually not true at all. And so any parent that will look at it would have no idea what they're looking at or how it is it relates to the cost of educating their children. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Committee, questions for proponents at this time? Senator Petty, and then Senator Straub, and then Senator Sykes.
So I'm looking at the bill, and I know that, I guess I'll add this for Mr. Trabert. You made a statement about building base, and you, in your testimony, you referred to an audit that the Kansas Policy Institute, which in itself has its own issues that it wants to bring forward, but that you did an audit and that you randomly picked out 25 school districts. But I get as I was listening to your testimony and looking at what you have in print here, I felt like it implies that principals do not know what's going on in their buildings, because your comments reflected that no one seemed to know what was going on. But don't our school districts have individual buildings, and individual buildings have principals, and principals are they have leadership, they oversee the academic growth that's going on in that building, but your testimony seems to reflect that that's not true.
My testimony, Senator, reflects what we found in our audit, which is that only 2 of 25 school districts at least completed the questionnaire that is required in statute. Whether principals know what is going on is irrelevant to that issue. The statute says the school board shall conduct the needs assessment. It was very clear to us that school boards did not conduct needs assessment as prescribed in statute.
Because they couldn't reflect back to you in a certain way that you wanted to see something reflected?
No, because they couldn't basically reflect anything. The whole point of the statute of the building needs assessment is to understand what the kids in that building need in order to improve. There was very little information submitted to us that had anything to do with that. It's not, and where it was, there was occasional reference to student achievement, but it was district-wide, not building-based as required in statute.
Follow up.
And looking at the bill, and the bill has specifically in it that in the minutes of the meeting at this board, in the minutes of the meeting at which the board approves its annual budget. So I know you're very familiar with our statutes and with legislation in the state of Kansas. Can you share with me any other piece of legislation where it specifically says in the minutes of the meeting?
Well, I think in this case, Senator, it's necessary because schools are pretty defiantly, in 5 cases at least, saying they're not even obligated to do it. One of them said that they did it and discussed it in a board meeting. There's no record of it. Unfortunately, this isn't the only case where we find that I guess statutes need to be spelled out crystal clear so that no one can say we don't have to do that.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dave. And I really like this handout here. And one thing that came to my attention in the last section there, the accountability of giving our schools a grading system of A through F. I think that's absolutely fair. We grade our students. Why not grade the institutions that they attend? My question, though, is, do you know of any other states that have a good system of grading their schools?
Sure. The state of Florida pioneered that concept about 20 years ago. And they have a methodology, and it's based on achievement in their state assessment. They have a methodology that is very detailed, and they did it for 2 reasons. They wanted the transparency. They wanted parents to know how well students are doing. And they not only wanted them to know, they hoped they would encourage them to get involved, and that's exactly what happened. When parents found out that their kids were in D or F schools, or some cases even C schools, a lot of parents wanted to know what was being done and what they could do to help. Over the years, they have raised their standards of what it takes to get an A or B or whatever, and each time they say that they have seen remarkable improvement in student performance. Florida, that was one of the things they did. Florida went from being one of the worst states in the nation in the late 90s to, in 2019, on the NAEP, one of the best. And it was particularly the low-income kids who said had a tremendous amount of growth in that period. Transparency was one of the things they did. Choice was another big thing. And accountability is another. And by the way, on the A through F, they also had a component, which we think is a great idea, of rewarding teachers. So there was $500 that went to every building, or $500 per student that went to every building that improved a letter grade. It could be from an F to a D, or they had an A and maintained it. That money went straight to the building so that it wasn't washed through the district, and it was used for teacher bonuses in that building. And obviously, teachers love that. It's the recognition, and they want to show that they improved a letter grade.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Mr. Trabert. On this, can I get a copy of your survey and of the 1,450 adults? Were all of those parents?
Parents or grandparents?
The 1,450 were all parents or
1,450. Let me.
On the, I guess it's the second blue square underneath, it says 1,450 adults of the state of Kansas. I'm just trying to see if all of those were parents or grandparents.
No, that they had to talk to 1,450 to get it down to, I think, around 600 who said they were parents or grandparents.
Okay, so this 88%, is this of the 1,400?
No, it is of the parents and grandparents.
Okay, I would like, if you can get me a breakdown of that, I would really appreciate that
Certainly.
data.
It's on our website. I'll be happy to send a link to the survey to Cindy.
And I'm assuming that has like the margin of error and things like that in
Yeah,
it.
it's around 5%.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Gossage, and then Senator Erickson, did you have a question? Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here, Dave. Some quick questions. What's the difference between state assessments compared to the needs assessment?
The state assessment is the test that students take and in order to determine their achievement level, which is reported in levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. The building needs assessment is an examination that the local school board is supposed to conduct to determine what the kids in that building need in order to improve.
Okay. Who wrote this questionnaire that you were mentioning, like only 2 school districts filled it out?
I don't know who. It's on the Department of Education website.
So it is a Department of Education questionnaire
Yes.
in response to this bill, the original bill? Okay.
I couldn't say when they did it, but probably in response to it.
Okay.
Sure.
And so level 3 and 4 are proficient. So I think you just answered my question, and that's based on the state's assessment as to how many students reach levels 3 and 4.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Madam Chairman?
I hear you. I believe this is Mr. O'Neill. There we go. We
Yeah,
see you now.
It is. Mike O'Neill, KPI. I wanted to maybe correct something with the answer to Senator Gossage. If you'll look at the attachment to my testimony, you have the building needs assessment that's posted on the Kansas State Department of Education website. The last version we can find was, and it's still up on the website, is May of 2012. And if you look at the heading, it was probably done in conjunction with the No Child Left Behind Act, which no longer is in existence. But the state still has a requirement for a building-based needs assessment. And this is the format that Kansas Department of Education still uses, if that helps clarify.
It does, Madam Chair. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other questions, so thank you very much. We will move on to our neutral testimony. We will start with Mr. Tallman, Mark Tallman, Associate Executive Director, Kansas Association of School Boards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Happy to be with you the first time this year. We're appearing here as neutral because there are provisions of the bill that we can support, or at least we think can certainly be improved. There are a couple places where we think if the approach like this is taken, it should actually be expanded. So I'll try to hit those very quickly and leave time for either your questions or the other speaker. Number one, our interpretation has been that the law has never required a particular process or a particular needs assessment. If that is the goal, it should be made clear. Whatever is done should be posted or can be posted as long as there's clear agreement on that. I think you may hear from the other conferee that we're interested in making sure there is clear agreement on what the process is and how it should be done. We would note that school districts are already involved in a number of processes that involve doing different kind of needs assessment, and we want to make sure that's as streamlined as possible. Frankly, the idea if we can put together consolidated information available to the public makes a lot of sense. The third thing is we would note, at least our understanding, is the State Board of Education's direction with accreditation is to very much be based on a process of looking at data, developing strategies to address and remediate that data and improve. It's important that that be tied as much as possible to the budgeting process so it can be done harmoniously. Fourth, one area we disagree with on this bill is to single out an examination and a focus on state assessments alone. Both the Supreme Court and the Legislature in state law have identified the goals as being the Rose capacities. And on my second page, I put together a chart for you which shows those capacities which you've adopted as education goals and how they compare to the Kansans Can outcomes of the state board. We think we should look at more than just state assessments, while it's important to also consider state assessments. Fifth, we would note, and I think here's a problem the last discussion has given to you, there is not currently a designation, at least that we're aware of what is grade level proficiency. The state board identifies different levels, so it's going to be critically important to decide what that is. And finally, the concern is over the idea of estimating time to reach a particular goal, which we can do, and that's not inappropriate, but it's important to understand the limitations a school is going to know of all the other factors with student achievement. I've given you some information, but I don't want to run out of your time on the last part of my testimony. Madam Chair, I'll stop now, let the other speaker go and answer questions when it's appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mark. Next up, we have Mr. Bowie, Executive Director of USA, Kansas, and Kansas School Superintendents Association. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Bowie.
You bet, Madam Chair. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, members of the committee. And you have my testimony in front of you, and I'm not going to repeat a lot of the things that Mr. Tallman said. But again, we are absolutely not afraid of the accountability piece of what's going on here. We do feel like we have a number of things that go on in our budgeting processes in our school districts that give us the data that we're looking for. Many of those are done through different types of committees, as I've listed in the testimony, throughout the course of the school year. As you guys probably are aware of, most of the time districts are not just considering a single year's budget. They're looking far down the road because you've got enrollment trends, or you've got building needs or space needs, or even staffing expectations that you try to fill. So there's a number of things that have to belong in there. And I can tell you, coming from the building level, for me as a building principal to look at my data, look at my staff, and try to fill out a sheet of paper is easily done. And I can hand it to the Board of Education to help them prioritize a budget. That's easily done. The challenge is now that Board of Education, with limited dollars, have to start making choices. Do I give the high school more money over here for this issue over here, or do I give the elementary the money over here, or if I've got multiple high schools, I've got to run into those challenges. By the work that we do through the committees, we can have those conversations, we can prioritize those. Many of these committees that we have in our districts include parents, teachers, administrators, and even school board members are a part of those. Many of our districts that participate in that committee process have a recorder. They bring those minutes back to the Board of Education as appropriate, especially if there's a board member that's in attendance to those meetings, and those board notes, or those notes from that meeting, are shared with the board through consent agenda or maybe even through Friday notes. So I think there's a lot of things that we're doing within our districts that are very transparent, that are out there. Can we do more? Of course, we definitely can. What I would encourage, and I wrote this in my testimony, and Senator Baumgartner and I had this conversation August, maybe, about the idea of getting together with a group of superintendents. We'd like to include Senator Dietrich with that, and some school board members, and talk about what the internal process currently looks like and how we can make it more uniform, if that's what we want to do as we move forward, and that we can be transparent for our communities and our patrons in our district, because we're not in the habit of trying to hide things. That's not done intentionally, and we're happy to work forward towards that. The other piece that I'll put in there as we talk about needs assessments. Our districts and our schools conduct numerous types of exams throughout the course of the year, whether they're done through intermediate state assessments, or they're done through formative types of assessments, local classroom assessments, universal screeners. As we talk about state assessments, that's one tool. That's a summative assessment done at the end of the year. But that is not the only thing a teacher and or building principal is looking at, as they're looking at the growth of their students or the growth of the school. There is a whole host of activities and things that are going on that we're looking at as a whole child. And I think to try to wrap everything around one assessment or one test that's done at the end of the year, and to be perfectly honest, as the kids get older, they get less interested in that state assessment as it moves forward, because they see less purpose for them personally. And so I think it's important that we continue to look at the whole piece of what we're doing in our schools with all those different types of assessments. And then, as we've had conversations about, I know there's a challenge with sharing that information with the legislature and our public, because it is sometimes it's done locally within our classrooms or those other types of screeners. So with that, I'll stand for questions as requested, and appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, committee, what questions do you have? I do have one question. I'll start. Mr. Tallman, did I hear you say that there are no standards for grade levels?
No. What I'm saying is, at least my understanding now, is the state reports 4 benchmark levels, 1, 2, 3, and 4. There are descriptors of each of those levels, but there is not one that is referred to as being on grade level. I think that people generally colloquially refer to like 2 and above as being on grade level and 3 and above as being college and career ready. But if you look on the website, unless something's changed, those specific labels are not attached.
Then what the heck would third grade reading competency be?
I think that would have to be defined as, what do you mean by that? Do you mean level 2? Do you mean level 3?
This is coming from the State Board of Education, Kansas CAN outcomes. So are you telling me that the State Board of Education hasn't defined what third grade reading competency is? Is that what we're supposed to believe?
My understanding is that if you look at their definition, they have a definition of what level 2 means or level 3 means. None of those definitions include the phrase grade level.
Okay. You indicated in your testimony that it just weren't certain. Obviously, if we want something from our boards of education, we're going to have to make it clear. And I'm going to read specifically from the statute. Each year, the Board of Education of a school district shall conduct an assessment for the educational needs of each attendance center in the district. I don't know what could be more clear of that. I don't know what could be more clear than that. They must conduct it. I assume if they conduct it, they are documenting it in some way. So since it doesn't say it has to be published and Cora ready, is that what your position is?
We have not surveyed our members to see how they've responded. You've heard about one survey of some of our members. So what I'm simply saying is there is not a requirement for a particular instrument to be used. So I think what boards have said is we are going through the process, but it doesn't follow a particular design or a particular survey. State Department has put out a sample survey which could be used. I'm merely saying that if what you're looking for is something like everyone using that sample available, I think that's what needs to be made clear.
So are you telling me that the school boards have not worked with the Department of Education to come up with the document? Is it going to be the business of the legislature to come up with a document, to update a document that's now 10 years old that's on the State Board of Education's website? Because we can come up with a document, but I'll tell you, and I will share this with Mr. Bowie as well, what I as a legislator continue to hear, and we'll start off, hear it from teachers. We're never involved in the budget process. And, you know, that's one of the things with this assessment, though it's 10 years old, it does say how many licensed personnel were involved in helping to determine the needs of this attendance center. Teachers, comma, principal, comma, counselors, comma, support staff, comma, etc. So I don't quite understand how we are a year later and we've not moved forward to come up with, here's an actual document that the school board can say, we are showing our work. We asked each attendance center to get together, pull together a group, and Mr. Bowie, the example you gave us of multiple districts are having these committees formed, I have yet to find those districts. So if you could provide a list of that, I think that would be really helpful. I think that we need that because, again, and we had this discussion about cybersecurity. You, as leaders of associations where taxpayer dollars are paid to you from the school districts out of the school funds. And Mr. Bowie, I was a little surprised to hear you say, with the limited dollars that schools have. Because quite frankly, this year and last year, school districts have been flush with money. They have been flush with money not only from the funding formula that was approved by the state Supreme Court, but also the money coming in from the federal government. So I understand choices have to be made, but what the legislature is saying, at least last year when we passed this, show your work. Show it so we can see at a building level how the budget was actually built for any given district. Did you really pay attention to how many students are attending classes? How many students attending are at risk? We know that changes from year to year, but we haven't seen anything in writing to indicate that school districts are actually doing that. So I want to understand really where you're coming from, because right now it is still standing like, okay, if you guys want it, you're going to have to be really specific before we're going to deliver it. And quite frankly, I think what I've heard from constituents, from teachers, from parents, from other legislators is, when is our public education community going to come together and start helping solve the issues? That's what we want to see, how you come together and solve the issues. So here we are a year later, because this is on or after July 1, 2021. That's when this law was put into place. And school districts are saying to us, by your testimony, well, we just haven't figured out how to do that yet. So we're going to find a way to figure it out, and we will document it in legislation. And so be it. If the legislators have to come up with the building assessments, then we will. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mark. Just a couple questions. Each student in the state of Kansas each public school student is required to take state assessments each year, correct?
Basically, yes.
For the most part, yes. Do you think that's fair, that each student is measured on their academic performance?
Yes.
And so why would we not hold every single school district to the same type of scrutiny and standards?
I think you do. I think that's why these testing results are available.
But we're not giving each school district the same exact assessment, or maybe it's that each school district isn't completing the same exact assessment, because it's my understanding, I have a fifth grader, for example, that she is given the same state assessment that every other fifth grader in the entire state is given, for the most part.
I guess what I'd answer is by saying we don't believe that the law in the past has required a single document. I'm here to say, if you want us to come up and if you want to have a single document, we're happy to try to work to do that. I guess if you want to simply accept the KSDE document, you could do that. Our interpretation is that hasn't been what has been required in the past. There's a requirement for a particular budget form that has to include certain information. Districts follow that. It has not been the case in this area.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam.
We are going to have to wrap this up because we're out of time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mark. Thank you to all the conferees for being here. I'll just make this very brief. There's a lot I would like to say, but frankly, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that we have a law that's very clear, and what we get from the people who are supposed to be teaching our children critical thinking skills are telling us they can't comply with the law because let me tell you what I heard today. We're too busy. We don't have a set format. We don't have enough money. We're already doing it. Madam Chair, I'm with the chair. I'm happy to put that in place. That wouldn't be hard to put in place. But I guarantee what we'll hear is that's the local control. That's the responsibility of the local school board. I would just like to know what we are to do when local school boards aren't complying with law, and then this is the response we get when we try to make sure that that law is enforced for a very good reason. Why wouldn't we want to base our allocation of funds on what's best for kids? I read what the requirements are. I'm like, why on earth is that such a hard lift? And the only thing I can think of, quite frankly, is you can't make us and you can't tell us what to do. And I find that quite shocking, Madam Chair. Thank you.
I think that this is going to take some more work. I would suggest that the Department of Education, because I see Mr. Hess here today, glad you're here. You probably know some folks that could help them update the assessment that was used as an example, as a document, though it's 10 years old. Mr. Bowie and Mr. Tallman, as far as superintendents and school boards, I want to see that you come together with your recommendation, not your criticism, but your recommendation for how year 2, this really is going to work, regardless of whether it's a single building school district or a 20 building school district. There will be a building assessment within every school district. That is the expectation. Every building will do their assessment. It's not just the principal. It's that there will be documented who is participating and how they came up with that information. Okay? Thank you very much. Committee, we are adjourned.